Okay, gang, we are recording. Hello, everyone. Welcome to this session of the IMCX conference. My name is Tom Augenthaler, and I am moderating a panel of experts today regarding B2B influencer marketing. And in particular, we're going to be talking about how a B2B brand in particular, can use influencer marketing and create a global campaign or a global program, and how you can scale this program um, once you get things going. So with that said, I would like to introduce myself along with my fellow panelists here. My name is Tom Augenthaler, and I'm a longtime B2B influence marketer, and you can find me at theinfluencemarketer.com. Next, I'd like to introduce Laura Mackey. Laura is with Hewlett-Packard Enterprise. Laura, why don't you just say a word or two about yourself?
Hi, everyone. My name is Laura, as Tom said, and I manage the Global Influencer Marketing Program for HPE, a B2B company selling technology to other businesses. So it's an honor. It's something I've been doing for over 10 years, and I'm happy to be here. Thanks.
Yeah, just so everybody knows, Laura and I go way back. So we've known each other for like 10 years or so. Anyway, next up is Sherry Hinish. Sherry, why don't you introduce yourself for a second?
Hi, everyone. I'm Sherry Heinisch.
Heinisch, I'm sorry.
The supply chain queen. No worries, Tom. I am a 2020 and 2019 supply chain pro to know and IBM futurist, and I have a growing brand called Supply Chain Queen. So I consider myself more of an advocate and a strategist than an influencer. So I sort of just fell into this space, but brands consistently leverage me in trends in supply chain, innovation, technology, sustainability, and also leading change in digital transformation.
Great. And last but not least, we have Tim Williams, CEO of an influencer marketing software platform called Onalytica. Tim, why don't you just spend a minute or two just introducing yourself?
Yeah, great. Thanks, Tom, and great to be here. So our work at Onalytica is really trying to connect brands and influence communities together. And the whole purpose of doing that is because people don't want to hear from brands, they want to hear from people. So we want to help encourage inspiring content by helping brands communicate through influencer networks.
Okay, great. And with all of that, let's get started. B2B influence marketing. Laura, how does a brand go about conceptualizing and putting together an influencer campaign? What are some of the things that we need to think about when we're doing that?
Sure. So from my experience, I think that an influencer marketing or advocate program with third-party influencers or analysts has to be ingrained in your overall digital marketing strategy, and it has to be tightly aligned with your comms group. So um, I work regularly with our analyst relations team as well, even though it's slightly different from our marketing team. And I sit in the marketing team. And then of course there's the social marketing element as well. So you want to build a program around influencers that are obviously very actively socially in Twitter, LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram. I mean, the list goes on, and we're seeing new platforms pop up all the time. So specifically in the B2B space, I think where we focus is Twitter and LinkedIn, primarily. I would say those are our top two. But we've built a program that is inclusive of many types of influencers. So we have ones that we partner with to create content. We have ones who are kind of like our megaphones, our amplifiers, who just we want to get a message out quickly, and we send it to influencers who we know have a really large audience. And then we have some of the technology experts who are writing blogs and are highly valued for their technology expertise, and we want to make sure that we're working with them, as well as more of the analyst types. So the ones who are actively outside doing research, consulting work with other companies. And so all of these factors kind of help us, when we think of it in those buckets, we we are able to craft an overall program that tries to touch all of those audiences. I may be missing one or two, which hopefully we can talk about today if there are other types of influencers that we can reach from a B2B perspective. But that's how we look at it initially when we started putting together our program. And of course, it was very event driven pre-COVID-19. We hosted a lot of influencers on site at events, and it was tons of fun to get to know these influencers and build relationships with them. And we have new challenges now that everything's virtual. So it's really interesting time to manage this type of program in the B2B space.
Okay, so how do you go about making that change? Because I mean, I've talked with, I think, each of you individually at some point or other about this COVID thing and how it's just completely flattened marketing programs and changed everything around going forward for a while. So, how do you make that shift from being an event-driven business into one where, okay, well now any events we're doing are going to be virtual. So what does that look like? I mean, and then how do you tie into Onalytica with that, with Tim? I'd really like to hear a little bit about, how you guys are working together to make that happen.
Sure. So for us, it's actually been beneficial that we've been able to take a pause. I mean, hopefully this isn't long term, right? I think we all agree. We'd love to get back to physical events, but in the meantime, it's enabled me to scale the program significantly. Where in previous times I've hosted 20 or so influencers on site, let's say. Now I'm able to scale much larger and reach more influencers and build more relationships. And so that's been a perk or a privilege that's come out of this situation that we're in. And I've only been able to do it with partners like Onalytica, who've helped me find the right influencers, as well as build those relationships and truly be able to scale a program that we just haven't been resourced to do at this level. So anyway, that's one of the positives I think coming out of this.
Yeah, and just to add to that point, and first of all, when I think we all are in influencer marketing, but hate the word influencer. So I think just as an organization that analyzes influence, we're talking about experts, we're talking about industry practitioners, we're talking about content creators who influence your target audience. But obviously that's a bit of a mouthful, so everyone just says influencers. But I think one of our clients said it really well when they were talking about journalists, like PR's managing journalists and AI's managing analysts. And then there was these anomaly influencers that were influencing the target audience that no one was managing. And so, out of that was born influencer marketing as the sort of catch-all phrase. So, first of all, I think, it's good to point that out, that this is not a just pushing product in B2C. Like B2B is obviously much more nuanced, and you're trying to find experts and content creators to tell inspiring stories and to deliver educational content to your target audience. And obviously by virtue of that, then brands get access to their audiences, and in an authentic way can obviously improve their brand positioning and can drive more demand generation as a direct result of those influences. So I think that's an important distinction. Obviously, COVID-19 is an incredibly sort of negative backdrop, but what it does give us, I think, is an exciting outlook of an acceleration of 5 years from digital interactions. I think McKinsey and LinkedIn did some research that it's actually pre-COVID, then traditional interactions were 52% compared to 48% digital interactions to influence the buyer, and now there's 66% of interactions are digital, and so we've accelerated so fast in terms of the digital transformation that companies have to go through in a series of like 4 to 5 months. So to Laura's point, I saw a lot of influencer programs that were engaging 10 to 20 influencers and were very events driven. Now the opportunity is, can you activate 50 to 150 voices, for example, in different with different tactics to have like mutual value for the influencers and the brand, and you don't have to stay local. You can obviously do this on a global basis, from HQ, or you can work with your different regions. So it's just transformed the whole potential and the horizons of the industry. And it's great to see a brand like HP leveraging that.
Mm.
Yeah, if I could add, just from the B2B influencer point of view, I think that 3 years of progress in 3 months has been great for everyone. And when you think about the future of work, the future of retail, bridging that physical and digital continuum in how you connect with people, how you build relationships, and also how you evangelize a brand's value. That's been something that I've had to help companies actually mobilize online on social media and truly connect deeper through digital with their executives and key customers. So business has been great. It's been very busy. And at the same time, I think if I could just be a little provocative here, it's pushed brands on their toes, where they really have to make the time count and make meaningful, deep connections, not only with customers, but why should someone choose their brand? And we can learn from that, and we should actually continue on this path, because when you think about investments in technology, sustainability, the emergence of the LOHAS and Naturalites in buying segments, consumer segments, people want to get right to transparency and trust in a brand. So I think that the progress has been great since COVID.
Interesting. Yeah, it's been a transformation for sure. It's been an accelerated one, as you guys have pointed out. And another influencer I was speaking to recently said to me that she said that she hopes that when physical events do start up again, that it isn't just what we were doing before COVID, meaning the keynote presentation was just another regurgitation of the press release that was announced that day. But it's actually the physical events themselves become even more valuable because of the value that's been driven virtually. Now people are going to expect even more from the physical events themselves. So what do we do to try and boost that and make it even more something more worthwhile? But interesting points. So in terms of the scaling aspect, I think a lot of people have questions about scale because it sounds easy, but then it's like just get a platform or some software and boom, you can scale everything. But it's really not that simple, is it, Laura? It's a little bit more nuanced, perhaps, right?
Yeah, and I think that it actually relates to what you were just saying previously, which is we want to create this authentic relationship with the influencers. The brand genuinely wants to build that relationship, and that's probably the most difficult part about scaling. Is
Mhm.
I talk to influencers, analysts, whatever we want to call them, however we want to identify them. I talk to them every single day. I make time to reach out in some form or other. That's really difficult to do when you're scaling it significantly. And so, I think one of the challenges that we could talk about even today is how can we do that in an authentic way? One of the feedbacks, a significant feedback that we got after we just completed our big virtual event was, hey, I really loved the human touch that you guys gave this virtual event. We made time to check in and just have Zoom meetings kind of like this to check in on each other. And that was really
Okay. So what do you mean by
appreciated.
human touch
Well, just,
virtually?
yeah, I know it's hard. It's hard, right? It's kind of like what we're doing here now, where we say, okay, let's pause. Normally we'd be going to dinner right now, but let's get together and just talk and see how your lives are doing. What are you working on? How's your family? Those kinds of moments that you can create where you keep it human. And
Mm,
yes, it's happening through a digital, kind of virtual platform, but you're able to connect. And I think that's what probably many of us are missing, given that we're all homebound in some form or
mhm.
fashion. Um, if we can keep that authenticity and that connectedness, I think that provides a lot of value for both the influencer and for the brands as well. And coming out of it, I think it'll make us stronger. when we are finally able to meet face to face, I think people will remember who made the time to keep the connection.
Right. But what about the scaling aspect? I mean, you
Yeah.
know, come on. I
Yeah, so I
mean,
definitely definitely identified the challenge.
Well,
Yeah,
I can sort of jump in to just to add a thought there. I think, and Laura's great. You've obviously got a full-time role in influence relations, which is fantastic. And when we look across the globe, and a lot of people in B2B companies, B2B tech is typically where a lot of the people that have full-time roles are. You don't tend to get influence relations managers in lots of either smaller technology companies or other B2B companies that it falls to their marketing director or comms director, for example, or someone who's head of social, and they're not thinking, how do I build relationships with influencers all the time? They're probably putting 5% of their time into programs like this. So then it begs the question, they default through their agency. And I know that we've got thoughts on this in this group, but it's because they outsource obviously their time, and then the agency starts managing relationships, and so it's quite hard for the brands to have that always on relationship. And when I talk to the influencer community, they, to your point, Laura, they know whether people are building relationships or whether they just want them to promote some content, and then they won't speak to them again. And I know, Sheree, you'll obviously have some good thoughts on that. So I think that's a real challenge with resource and how to scale programs. So I mean, I'll let
yeah, let's
I'll
just make something
my
clear. There's a
thoughts
difference
there.
between a consultant and an agency, right? I'm a
So
consultant. So what I do is I help come in and help the whole brand strategize from scratch and build out an influencer program that's going to be enduring and built upon relationships. Agencies don't always think that way now, do they?
they do not. So
Sure, you want to elaborate?
So I do want to just come back to a point that Tim made around many of the smaller technology companies or either smaller brands. They don't understand influencer marketing. And what I find 50 to 60% of the time is I'm actually in a role of helping those companies build out a strategy. So
Which
the
is
role,
amazing.
but it's unbelievable. And for example, I can share. So even if a B2B influencer has a media kit, they have a really strong digital footprint, you still get those 50% of the time brands reaching out and they want to, work with you, but they have no idea what to do. The internal mobilizing is really, really important, because when you are trying to build a relationship potentially with a B2B influencer, time is money, and you can't spend 3 weeks back and forth in email, several months trying to get the necessary approvals and requisitions in place to start moving. 3 months is gone. We've had 3 years of progress in 3 months on digital with COVID. So by that time, the influencer has already moved on to something else in most cases. I think that I personally am interested in building more of a strategic partnership, because at this stage in my career, coming from industry, really putting a lot of time and effort into getting those credentials and the pedigree that people would recognize, I want to have a deeper relationship with a brand. I'm not interested in a one-off transaction. So that's another thing that I think that brands have to recognize. When you have that opportunity to build that relationship, that connection, the first 1 or 2 times you interact with someone, even in real life, in personal or business, it's very, very important that you set the stage and that you start off on the right foot. So part of that means that you have to engage people like you, Tom. I do not like working with agencies. Now, I'm not saying if you have an opportunity, I wouldn't work with you in the future, but it's just,
Yeah. Well,
the
the eight.
signal is lagging, it's just, there's
Well,
approvals,
yeah.
it's unorganized, and it's like, I don't know that the brands really have a sense of net promoter score. So if we can create feedback loops, I think, what is the influencer's experience with, the agency, and how does that impact their impression of the brand even? And maybe Tim and Laura can share some thoughts around that.
Yeah, well, I mean, sorry, go for it, Laura.
No, you go ahead, Tim. Go ahead.
Well, a couple of years ago, we at Onalytica did some research into brand influencer partnerships, what brands offered to influencers and what influencers wanted from brands, because we were fascinated by the disconnect, to your point, Sherry. So it's just really interesting that most brands were wanting to just get the influencers to share some content, and the influencers wanted a deeper relationship and a more strategic partnership with the brand. Now, some would say, okay, that's just money driven. But then when we're asking the influencers, what do you most value from the brand? Money wasn't the number one thing. Of course, they want to be paid for their time, and you have to, if you're an independent influencer who doesn't work for a brand or is on someone else's payroll, then you have to earn a certain amount of money to satisfy you. But it was actually building profile and expertise and the quality of the work, and there was lots of other things which the influencers valued. So I think I think people do understand how to build relationship. It's just whether they want to put in the effort, and then do they have a full-time role? Because if you have a full-time role, then you'll probably think more deeply about it. And I think agencies are under pressure from brands to hit certain deliverables, but don't have the control over all of the process. So I think it's a natural outcome of an immature market. But I think, Laura, I think you've got a very mature program that's working very, very well. And Sherry, you've obviously helping lots of brands like make their campaigns and strategies more mature. So I think I think it will change over the next 12 to 24 months. And ultimately the influencers will choose which brands they want to work with.
Yeah, and I think that, Tim, I agree completely. And I think one of the things that we're kind of tiptoeing around here, but we haven't flagged yet, is at least for us and for many of the brands that I know that work with influencers, we're working with them at mostly unpaid. I would say the vast majority of the influencers that we work with are not receiving any kind of payment for the work that they're doing, whether that's just we're feeding them information and they're tweeting about it or whatever it is. And so in some ways it's really mature, but when I compare how our influencer marketing campaigns are in the B2B space, I would say it's not as it varies different from the B2C companies that are likely paying per tweet or per publication. So it's interesting because, Tim, to your point, we have to provide value for the influencer as well, especially if it's in an unpaid. And sometimes for me, from a brand perspective, it's early access to news, so they can be the first one to break an announcement that we have if they want to push that out to their audience. There's little things that we can do like that help us keep this always on relationship with the influencers, so that we're not just bringing them in for one thing, paying them some money, and then leaving and not talking to them again. So anyway, those are just my thoughts around what you had said, Tim, but I think that's an important topic we haven't really touched on yet.
So it depends on what the ask is. I think that's important to recognize. It's one thing to work with an influencer without a cash payment, but it depends upon what the ask is. Because if you're asking them to produce video, then they're going to have to edit that video, and we're talking about a time-consuming process, and it takes up a lot of professional time. Because most of the B2B influencers out there that I work with, most of them have day jobs, meaning they're running their own company, or they're working for a company, or they're part of a consultancy, or they're an independent analyst of some kind, or with a team of analysts. So they've got their own income coming in, but so they're not dependent upon working with brands for this, for most of them. But it depends what that ask is, and I think that's something that maybe we could all touch upon a little bit here, because the more that you're asking them to do, well, then there's got to be probably some other kind of compensation too, right? I mean, Writing is
Sure.
time consuming, video is time consuming, all these things are time consuming. Sherry, maybe as an influencer, somebody works with, brands big and small, maybe you can shed a little light on that.
Sure. So I like to think of non-paid asks or partnerships as in-kind partnerships. Okay.
Hmm.
So it's, you're asking something from the influencer. My guiding principles do not change, whether it's a paid engagement or it's an in-kind partnership. Purpose, product, people, and potential value. Those are the 4 Ps that guide every decision that I make. I am very frequently asked for in-kind partnerships. Now, they're not positioned as in-kind partnerships up front. But Tom, we've had this conversation a million times that if you want a certain quality and that if you want a very focused and niche audience and you want engagement that isn't just, how many followers does this person have? When you look very deeply, what's tucked underneath the numbers, there's value in that. There's intrinsic value in a network, in leveraging a network, an influencer's network and their point of view. And, there's always this tension between price and value in this space that I don't understand. I'm very surprised, Laura, that most of your influencers are not being paid. I'm actually shocked because when you think about people's time, I'm not in a position where I have a full-time job. This is what I love. I wake up and I'm pulled by this every day. And that shows up in the engagements that I have. I'm constantly, thinking about the best way to leverage a brand's value prop and how they're communicating across social. I care about the brands that I partner with. And I want to see them succeed. And it's not a one-off transaction. So when you're guided by purpose, product, people, and potential value, and you choose the right people to partner with in influencer marketing, it shows up in the quality of the work. And for that reason, they should be compensated.
So I have some strong views on this, but just as an arbiter between the brands and the influencers, because it doesn't matter to me personally, but we're obviously trying to connect 2 groups together, and I think that if you speak to a lot of influencers, they are shocked about sort of non-paid engagements. If you speak to B2B marketers and communications people, then they can't pay all of the influencers they want to work with because you'd spend like $200,000 on and it also there's a compliance issue and there's lots of complications that can arise from that. So I think the interesting thing is in B2C, I would imagine that 90% of the influencers are paid, and in B2B, probably 10%. But to Tom's point, it depends on the ask, because if you're not paying someone, you've got to provide a lot of value to the community. You've got to make it really light touch. It can't be something that seems like an onerous task to do. Any kind of depth engagements, should be paid unless they're getting just tons of intrinsic value from your brand. So I think turning full circle in terms of scale, Onalytica, we have a kind of a pyramid, like in sort of 3 tiers, where at the top you might have your strategic partnership influencers with like 5 to 10 influencers, where they would be on a paid retainer and you're asking a lot from them and they're helping you tell your brand story very effectively globally. And then the tier 2 might be a lot of industry practitioners who don't even consider themselves to be influencers, but just have a ton of expertise and value, and they're not paid, they're not expecting to be paid, but they can also connect with your subject matter experts internally and your senior execs and have a lot of really good social media engagement. And then the third tier is the wider community that would be everybody else, where you can leverage and you can add value and you can really scale this to drive your global brand awareness and demand generation. So I think it's a challenge, but the payment and the scale, I think, are 2 of the really big challenges and very heated discussion points when I've been at any conference.
Yeah, and compensation isn't necessarily financial compensation. So I think that's also misunderstood. I can share a couple examples recently where a brand approached me to do something not in kind, but they positioned it in a different way, where there was compensation, not financial, but they bridged introductions to very senior level executives, COOs, CSCOs. So I was in a closed door fireside chat with 15 people who then that parlayed into a consulting gig. So
Mhm.
it's sort of, it has to make sense because you're investing your time, you are leveraging your brand and your relationships and your influence, but it doesn't necessarily have to be money, but there has to be potential value for both parties.
I think that's where
Yeah,
that
I
that
completely
word,
agree with that.
yeah, that's where that word relationship comes in, right, Laura? I mean, and what do we mean by that word relationship? It's not just, oh, every 3 months I send you an email and say hello. I mean, it's there's more to it. And one of the things that I remember I worked with HPE a number of years ago, Laura, with you, and one of the things that we were always trying to make happen was we wanted the influencers to meet the people inside of HPE itself, and whether that's executives or managers or whoever it was that was bringing the
Yeah.
product and the services to life, and they get to know each other as people, then the relationship becomes really a relationship, right? Because now there's multiple touch points. It's not just the one choke point person there.
Yeah, and I think and I almost look at it as networking, but in a more human way, where you're building connections, of course, within the brand, and that's our ultimate goal, is that we're helping make those connection points. But we also kind of offer a community for the influencers that we work with, so they're able to connect with each other, and whether or not they're connecting on HPE things, it doesn't matter to us. We like to foster that community among the influencers, so that at the very minimum, that's sort of baseline value that they're getting, is access to each other, engagement with each other, which in turn helps them build their overall brand. As you said, I mean, many of them, they don't have the goal of becoming, an influencer full time as their primary career. They just like the engagement with people in the industry. And so
Hmm.
if that's something that we can do as a brand to help foster that, because we do work with so many, then that's, it's a win-win for everybody. And completely agree with, providing that value above and beyond, um, that they may, anything else that they may be asking for.
It seems to me and Sherry, you mentioned it in terms of the time of approvals and sign off and like what the ask is and what the
And payment.
what the payment or compensation, all of that. Um, it's a massive challenge, and we see it as, because we're a vendor in the space, and because technology can provide solutions, like we have an ambition to help streamline all of that activity, because we get it that there are challenges on both sides. It's not that people don't want to make it happen. Everyone, a lot of the time, everyone is wanting the same thing, but just, if it's passing through many different people, if it's something which is a bit complex, then something that can be relatively easy, if you're all in one room, can take like 3 weeks to actually sort out. So I think the interesting thing is, since influencers are, there could be millions of people that people call influencers, and someone at a brand level doesn't know this particular individual. So once you understand their motivations, once you understand whether they got a rate card or not, or whether they consider themselves to be an influencer, whether they can create content, whether they can promote something as an alternative to paid search, then the relationship becomes easier to broker. Um, and so I think, unless technology delivers a solution, whether it be us or anybody else in the marketplace, I think that there'll always be that that disconnect, even though the marketplace will mature.
Interesting. Yeah. I know that the terms of the payment, I mean, one of the things that I think people need to understand out there is that the way a consumer company does influencer marketing and the way a B2B company does it obviously are different, but that also involves how budgets are allocated inside of a B2B company. Most of the time, pre-COVID, much of the marketing dollars are allocated towards those events that Laura was talking about. So whether it's the company's putting on its own 1 or 2 events a year, plus going to some other industry events, you know, that's been kind of blown apart. But now they're trying to figure out how to allocate all those dollars. And a B2B just does it differently, and they pay differently. So sometimes to get an influencer paid with a B2B company, you've got to put them through the procurement process, which isn't always the most.
They have to be set up as a vendor. There's a
Has to
lot
be
of
set up as a vendor. So
paperwork. Yeah, there's a third
paperwork.
party that actually facilitates payment. There are terms that must be adhered to per the company. Not
So
your turn.
So it's just different, you know.
Yeah, but I don't expect that to be. I mean, technology needs to provide the streamlined payment solution, and otherwise, it's not feasible for that to continue. So I think a lot of brands, after 12 months of working with influencers, have to go into phase 2, because that just doesn't work for anybody really.
Yeah, I've actually tried to streamline that process. So I'm a supply chain gal, which means I'm a process geek. I look at cycle time, I look at touches in a process, and it's like, let me help you. Okay, let me help you fix this, because I've led P2P transformations. And using Stripe has actually been super cool. If you go through third-party vendors and if you break up your invoices so they're under a certain dollar threshold, you can almost get paid immediately, which has been really helpful. But also I think that whole process, if it's so exhaustive up front and you're like, wow, this is what it takes to just transact with this brand. Are you kidding me?
Sherry, we should have a conversation following this call about that, because
Okay.
I encounter that myself occasionally.
Yeah.
So anyway, folks, we only have about a minute left. And so I think, do we have any parting thoughts around this before we wrap up? Tim, we'll start with you. Parting thoughts?
Parting thoughts are that B2B is not the same as B2C. Like, it's a completely different ball game. And I think the group has said it perfectly. I think it's relationship first, like what's in it for the influencer, what's in it for the end target audience. Are we creating content that's inspiring and educational? And if those are your guiding principles, you want to build a relationship, you want to deliver for the end target audience, and you don't want to say, hey, my brand is the best, then you'll more successfully build your program and you'll build those relationships naturally.
Sherry?
Sure. I would just encourage both brands and influencers that the internet never dies, and for people to really look deep before they align their themselves with an influencer or a brand. And, I'd like to imagine a world where, just like in the workplace, you don't have to leave your values at the door. And how can you build meaningful partnerships together where your values are reflected by what you say, what you post, what you do, and how you behave off social media.
Cool. Laura?
That's amazing. That's really great. I think one of the things that, well, first, I'm just blown away by the career I get to have. The role that I'm in with managing this program allows me to interact with so many influencers on a daily basis. I pinch myself all the time and go, is this really my job? Like, it's so much fun. And I genuinely don't I don't approach it as like a give me all the time. And I would encourage influencers as well. And most of them that I work with aren't that way either. It's truly building a network, having a lot of fun along the way. I mean, everyone who participates in my program, they say this is fun. Like, this is way more fun than the analyst programs I've done in the past, or other things, because we truly like to relax, have fun, and get the job done. And when it feels so fun, it doesn't feel like work. And so that's one of probably the best things about what I get to do, is just relaxing and building those relationships, having fun, meeting people from all over the world. I've got friends all over the world, and I truly feel like the influencers that I work with are friends. And so I just, that's obviously a big part of our program, is that relationship building and kind of staying in touch. And anyway, so that's my part.
Can I share something to your point?
Sure.
Yeah.
This is a letter that I just received from Gail, who is at SAP Ariba. And it's a beautiful note. just checking in on me and the family, and I can actually plant this. And she knows that I'm a sustainability geek and that I love gardening. And I can plant this in a pot and grow flowers and be reminded of the relationship that I have with SAP
Oh, that's
Ariba.
cool.
This is
That's
how you
amazing.
do it, people.
That's amazing.
That's cool.
Absolutely.
Well
Love
done,
that.
Gail.
Yeah.
Well done, Gail. Yeah, I know Gail.
We love you, Gail.
That sounds like Gail. Anyway, thank you everybody for joining us today. This has been a very fun session, and I'm sure that our contact information will be included with this particular episode. So with that said, we'll see you next time.
Bye,
Thank you, everyone.
everyone.
Bye,
Bye.
everybody.